Sabah al-Khair, good morning, dear listeners. You're listening to Radio 3CR on 855 AM and Palestine Remembered with Robert Martin, Nasser Mashni, and Yusuf Ahmed al-Rimawi.
Palestine Remembered is Australia's only English-language radio program that is totally dedicated to Palestine. We'd like to welcome those listening on 855 and those that will join us on podcast at 3cr.org.au.
Thanks for joining us. Stay with us and enjoy the episode.
Bringing you the news and views and the untold side of the Palestinian struggle for freedom from a Palestinian perspective. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Palestine Remembered. Today we're joined by international Palestinian superstar, renowned comedian. He's a lawyer, he's an educator, he's an adjunct professor, he's a funny guy, and just a brilliant, brilliant Palestinian and the personification of all that we can be. Good morning, Amer Zahr.
Good morning, Nasser. Great to see you.
Really, really great to see you, Amer. We just finished a tour. We're going to get to that in a second. But one thing we like to do whenever we have a new guest on the show is to have them speak to their Nakba story.
Well, let me tell you an interesting, and this is a true story. I've told this story a couple times on stage, but I've written it before. So my grandfather, his name was Shafi, my dad's dad. As you know, I have a Christian dad and a Muslim mom. And my dad's dad, his name was Shafi, and he was born in Nazareth in 1912. He was the second of two sons. His older brother was named Tofi Shafi. We do that a lot. We're not always creative with our names, So Tofi Shafi. And then after he was born, his mother died. Now his father's name was Musa. Okay, so Tofi and Shafi's dad, his name is Musa. Now Musa married another woman and became Tofi and Shafi's stepmom. She will remain unnamed because she wasn't very nice to them, okay? As you might, sort of a Cinderella story, right? She wasn't very nice to them. And as they got older, they didn't have a great relationship with her. She had a couple more kids with Musa. And then Tofi, when he became 18, he got married. He ended up having like 12 kids in Nazareth. And Shafi, when he turned 18 or 19 or something like that, he was just having a very bad time of it in Nazareth. So he said, you know what, guys, I'm leaving. And he left. And he went to Jaffa, and he decided to start a new life on his own in Jaffa. And in Jaffa, he decided also to change his name. He kept his last name Zahr, like our last name, but he changed his name to his baptismal name, which was Ilyas. So he started letting people know that I am Ilyas Zahr. He got jobs, and he eventually met this family in Jaffa, of whom my grandmother was a part of, and they decided in the 40s, they were like in their 30s, so they got a little older. They decided they wanted to get married. In 1944, they decided they wanted to get married, and right before they were going to get married, my grandfather Shafi Ilyas, he's now Ilyas, got called up to fight for the British in World War II, because many Palestinians were drafted by the British to fight in World War II. So he went to go fight, and he got shot. I think it was in France. He got shot in the leg, and, they sent him home. Now, somehow the news got back to Nazareth, because they had heard that he went to Jaffa, but they kind of, they lost contact. Somehow news got to Jaffa that Shafi Ilyas had died in the war. And when people in Jaffa told Shafi Ilyas that, hey, your family in Nazareth thinks you're dead, he said, good. I don't like them anyway. I don't really want to hang out with them anyway. They think I'm dead. That's fine with me. So then he decided to marry my grandmother, Selma, in 1947. In 1948, they had my father. In March of 1948, they had my father, George. And then in April of 1948, they were ethnically cleansed to Amman. And he ended up in a neighborhood in Amman called Al-Hashmi Shamali. Before that, they had lived in a beautiful, vibrant neighborhood in Jaffa called Al-Ajami. Now, Jaffa was one of the cultural and economic centers of Palestine. That's why Shafi moved there when he left Nazareth. But they took all of Jaffa. They kicked out many thousands of Palestinians from Jaffa and Lid, Ramle, that whole region where there was many, many successful Palestinians. So now Shafi, or his name is Ilyas, and Selma, my grandmother, and George, and then they had another daughter named Janet. These Arab Christians came up with, in the 50s, they liked all these like Victorian names, Janet. I have all these like cousins, Victoria, Johnny, Claudette. Anyway, but at least they weren't going to lose their culture because they lived there, but still. So they lived in Amman throughout the 50s and in the 60s. Now, at that time, of course, the West Bank, what we call the West Bank today, was part of Jordan. And then there was the state of Israel, and there were still, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians lived in the state of Israel, including in the city of Nazareth, where Musa, my great-grandfather, and his family lived. Okay, I'm getting to the good part. So the only people that used to be able to cross the borders during that time were some Christians. During the holidays, they would get permits from Israel to enter East Jerusalem, controlled by the Jordanians, to go to churches and stuff. But priests would travel pretty freely between like Nazareth and Amman. Okay, so my grandparents and my father went to a church in Amman where there was a priest who traveled frequently between Amman and Nazareth. Now, he knew the Zahr family in Nazareth, and he knew Ilyas and Salma and George in Amman. One day when he's in Nazareth, he notices a plaque on a wall in a church that says in Arabic, Ila al-marhum Shafi Ilyas Zahr, in the memory of Shafi Ilyas Zahr, my grandfather. And then he goes back to Amman, and he goes to this other church in Amman, and he meets this guy named Ilyas Zahr. And he says to Ilyas, Ilyas, kind of crazy. Is there a chance that your family, this is like 1960 or 61, is there a chance that your family in Nazareth thinks you're dead? And he said, yes. He's like 50 now. He's kind of over it. He says, yeah, they think I'm dead. And the priest says, well, would you like me to reconnect you with them? And Ilyas says, sure, sure, try. So then the priest goes back to Nazareth. He meets Musa, who he already knows. Musa is now in his 60s or 70s. He meets Musa, who he already knows, and he says, Musa, I think that your son is alive, and he's in Amman. But just in order to be sure, I need you to write me a list of questions that only Shafi Ilyas will know the answer to. So he writes down these questions. They go back to Amman. He asks Shafi these questions. And Ilyas answers these questions perfectly, of course, because he is the guy. And now there's confirmation, and he takes this confirmation back to Nazareth, and they decide they want to reunify the family. So Musa decides that he's going to get a permit to come into East Jerusalem in 1964 or 3 or whatever, when, of course, it's controlled by the Jordanians. And so he comes in. And Ilyas drives from Amman down to East Jerusalem to meet him. And now they reunited. It's very beautiful. They've reunited, father and son, father in his 60s, almost 70s, son in his 40s, almost 50s, and they've reunited. And they do this now for, a couple years. They reunite. Maybe Musa comes for one night to Amman, stays at his son's house, and this beautiful story, this beautiful reuniting after the Nakba and a fake World War II story had separated them, and this stepmom from 40 years ago had separated them. Well, this goes on for a couple years, and then sometime around 1965, Musa gets in this huge fight with his wife in Nazareth. Huge Arab fight. I mean, you can only imagine, right? So, so cursing each other's mothers and histories and families. And he says, you know what? I'm out of here. I'm leaving. I'm going to go live with my son, Ilyas, in Amman. And he leaves Nazareth. He takes a bus from Nazareth to Afuli, which is a town about 10 kilometers south of Nazareth. And then he starts walking. And he walks. And he ends up in the hills of Jenin. He crosses the border of the West Bank and ends up in the hills of Jenin, which is, of course, controlled by Jordan still. This is pre-1967. And the Jordanian security forces catch him. He's walking alone in the hills of Jenin. They ask him for his ID. He gives them his ID, and his ID is Israeli. He's an Israeli citizen of Nazareth. And they say to him, what are you doing here? And he says, I'm going to see my son in Amman. And they say, well, not so fast. So they detain him. Then the Mukhabarat, the Jordanian security, comes to my grandfather's house in Amman and says, hey, we caught this old guy, Musa, in the hills of Jenin. He says he's your dad. Is that true? And Ilyas says, yes, that's true. And Ilyas says to the Jordanian services security guys, will you let him come see me? They said, of course not. No, we're not going to let him come see. That doesn't work like that. We don't have diplomatic relations with this country. We're not going to come see him. So they don't arrest Musa or anything, but they send him back to Nazareth, which, by the way, makes me believe that my great-grandfather Musa must be the only Palestinian ever deported to Israel. He's got to be the only Palestinian. I mean, he like reversed the Nakba. He was deported from Jordan to Israel, which is kind of like what we've all been hoping for, right? He was deported there. Okay, then they don't give him permits anymore to come to Jerusalem on the Christian holidays. Then 1967 happens, and now the Israelis take the West Bank. Now Jordanian people who live in Jordan can't go to the West Bank. And then in 1970, Musa died. But this story is a true story of how the Nakba and colonialism and imperialism of the British. I mean, my grandfather fought for the British because he didn't have any choice. You know, they would colonize places and then use those people as soldiers. And he almost died. And then he let his parents think he was dead. Think of all the things that are wrapped up in this story. British colonialism and imperialism. The Nakba, because he gets kicked out of Jaffa, ethnically cleansed, and ends up in Amman, and his family thinks he's gone. And then just general Arab, like, you know, how many Arabs do we know that like get in a fight with their family and don't talk to them again for like 30 or 40 years? So there's that. And then this priest who just sees this plaque of this dead guy who he knows is alive. And then it is as Palestinian as it gets. And that is the story of my grandfather.
That's a brilliant story. Now let's talk about your overachieving father. I mean, you're an overachiever, but it's a dark shadow he's casting over the rest of the family.
Well, you know, it's all relative. You know, it's all. I mean, my dad was again born in Jaffa in 1948. Became a refugee at 1 month old. Grew up in UN schools. He would wake up every morning at 4 o'clock with his mother, my grandmother, because she got a job in Amman, distributing powdered milk from the UN rations to her fellow refugees because she could speak a little English. So he knew that. In fact, to this day, my dad refuses to eat white beans because white beans were part of the ration that UN refugees would get. And it doesn't matter how delicious they are. It brings memories to him that he can't eat them. And he grew up in UN schools. He finished very high in high school, so he was able to go to college. And then just so that he could get a master's degree, he had to finish very high in college, and he did. And then just so that he could get a PhD, he had to finish very high in his master's degree, and he did, of course. And then, you know, he ended up in America, and this guy, you know, by the way, he went back to Jordan to teach. And then because he was still Palestinian and loud, he got kicked out of Jordan, which ended up, you know, I wish he would have just stayed. I mean, maybe he just would have stayed like some middle-class professor in Jordan with an American PhD. But no, the Jordanians decided to get involved in this thing, and they kicked him out of Jordan. And then he ended up in America, and then he gets a job with a research company in America called DuPont, the largest chemical company in the world. They decide, hey, this guy's pretty talented. They let him run a research lab, and then what does he do? 41 patents. 41 patents later, he's working on like bulletproof vests and Stainmaster carpets and polymers, and he's just creating new plastics out of nowhere, this Palestinian refugee. 41 patents. Then he has 4 kids. And what do? I mean, we're just American spoiled kids. We're asking to go out on the miniature golf and all this kind of stuff. And this guy is like, you know, supporting us, supporting his cousins back in Jordan. And, you know, we have to live with this guy. And this, you know, I mean, total overachiever. It's like the joke I tell on stage, right? I mean, I bring home my test, I get a 96, and my father says, "Where's the other 4?" And then he used to have, oh my God, in Australia, do they have like parent-teacher conferences?
Oh my God.
My dad never misses one of those. Only not because he cares. He never misses them because he needs to ask the teachers one important question. So do you guys offer any extra credit work? Because if they're, you know, we had this thing called extra credit. Like, you know, your teacher might say, you know, you could do what you have to do, but if you want to do this other stuff, you might get extra credit. Once my dad discovered the concept of extra credit, he'd get mad at teachers who didn't offer it. And then, by the way, and when I was like in the 5th grade, my teachers, we lived in a, you know, suburban America. When I was in the 5th or 6th grade, my teachers went on strike because they weren't getting paid enough. And what did my dad do? My Palestinian PhD full of patents dad, he decides, guess what? we're going to go strike with the teachers because he's still Palestinian. So he goes down on the picket line, starts striking with the teachers. He's striking with the teachers, and then when their salary thing gets, he struck with it. He went go strike with the teachers, but it's because the teachers were asking for more money. So he said, I'm striking with them because we live in a neighborhood. A teacher should make enough money to live in the neighborhood in which they teach, which makes sense. Okay, but now you have to imagine this Arab guy with a huge accent, with a big old Saddam Hussein mustache, is going down and striking with all these white people. So he strikes with them, and they win. And then he becomes very popular in the community. But can he leave it at that? No, of course not. So then he decides to run for school board. So he runs for the school board and he wins. He wins school board seat, and now he's sitting on the school board while he has 4 kids in the school, and he's there. Whenever anything happens in the school board, he starts saying, everybody, I think we should make a report to the Secretary General. And they're like, bro, there's no Secretary General. Okay, this is just a school board in little suburban Philadelphia. And, but he's very active. We find ways to be active and involved. It could be the White House, it could be the school board. So now everybody knows that our 4 kids, and everybody knows our dad's on the school board. Everybody knows, he's George. They say to him, George, oh, George, that's an interesting name. And he goes, well, actually I'm Christian, and that is a Palestinian name, George. It's a Palestinian name, George, St. George. He was Palestinian. And then white people would be like, so when did you convert to Christianity? He's like, well, actually we invented Christianity. So you got to deal with this. I mean, we can, Arabs invented everything according to my dad. I would bring home my chemistry homework, hoping that, you hope at least you get a little wasta, right? That your dad will help you. Say, Baba, can you help me with that chemistry homework? Because I just want the answer. Okay. The answer is like carbon or something, just give me the answer. First, he looks at the question. Then he's immediately disappointed. So he's immediately disappointed. So I can't believe that you don't even know the answer right away to this question. All right, Baba, I'm sorry. Can you tell me how to do it? Sure. But first, I don't know if you know this, Arabs invented chemistry. I'm like, all right. So now you feel like culturally ashamed that you don't know the answer to this, and it takes about 15 minutes later, and then finally maybe he lets you know that the answer is carbon. This is the problem of dealing with a refugee in the house. They never stop. They just never stop. I mean, we had to push him to retire, please retire. And he finally retired after all these patents. He's got, Google the U.S. Patent Office and just put my dad's name in, and it's like Google result after Google result after Google result of this guy, George Zahr. So this is the world that we lived in. And then what did I do? I became a comedian. I go around, I tell jokes, they pay me money. Finally, now he's accepted. I went to law school, so you have to get an advanced degree. I went to law school. Finally, he's accepted this, and he's excited about it. My mom is the one. They come to my shows sometimes, and they walk around after my shows, and because I talk about my parents in my shows, as you know, and they walk around after my shows, and my dad is very excited. He'll walk up to people and be like, the guy he's talking about in the shows, that's me. I am the inspiration for all of this. And my mom walks around after my shows and says, yes, I think he's very funny, but he is a lawyer. So this is what I'm dealing with, Nasser. 45. I've never been to therapy. I guess comedy is my therapy. The stage is my therapy.
You're lucky to have that. When I came home with those questions from my father, first, before anything, this is a year 7 question and you're in year 9. How could you not know this? And then the teeth would grind like, you're my heir. You've disappointed all of your ancestors.
Well, the problem is kids back home. Look, there's no question that if you're raised in the Arab world, you are just smarter than if you're raised in America and Australia, because the schools are, they just have higher standards, unfortunately. And most importantly, though, the politics of the world and even the politics of the countries we live in, like America, affects them more than it affects Americans. Yeah. So they know it. So, you walk up to I've done it happen before, like 10 years ago, I walked up to like a little 6-year-old Palestinian kid in Jerusalem, and he said to me, "You are from America?" I said, yeah. He said, so do you think that Barack Obama will win enough votes to get re-election in the Electoral College? I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Go play soccer. What's wrong with you? But like, this is the world that they live in. Yeah. It is unbelievable. It just goes to show that we've been held back. Sometimes we say about ourselves that, we're not organized enough and it's not true. They have bled us and made us fight each other for such a long time. But Qatar and the World Cup showed that if Arabs have opportunity and money and means, they can put on some of the best global events and have very organized societies. And of course we can. And of course we did. And they call us uncivilized. Remember, uncivilized at the beginning of the Ukraine war. I mean, give me a break. I mean, we invented chemistry. We invented all these things. Baghdad, 1,000 years ago, had a municipal sewage system. 1,000 years ago, while British kings and queens were shitting in a hole in the ground. So I'm done hearing. There's political reasons for these things that are going on today. There's imperial reasons for these things going on today, not cultural reasons. And they always try to make us feel like it's our culture is deficient. It's your culture, it's your religion, whatever. And no, it has been an orchestrated campaign of pushing down the Arab world. I mean, American foreign policy for at least 120 years has been based on pushing down and pushing back the Arab world. And if you look at the regimes they have attacked and the regimes they like tend to be sometimes a little bit more religious fundamentalist based regimes. And the regimes they've attacked and tried to kill have been the regimes that push pan-Arab pride and we're all in this together and let's all be one people. So it's clear what's going on. And luckily these things are reversing now. Technology has changed a lot. But, we have to really push back when people say, your culture is the problem, your religion is the problem. No, there's political reasons for these things, and we are coming back. And I love to see the rise in Arab pride and culture around the world. And that's why I always do it at my shows, to push hard that we have this beautiful, beautiful, long, beautiful culture.
Brilliant, Amer. Now, you came out and you did a national tour, the east coast of Australia. PANSMA, the Palestinian Australian New Zealand Medical Association, they brought you out and you did a gala event in New South Wales. And then from there to New Zealand to Adelaide, Adelaide to Melbourne, Melbourne back to Sydney. So you've done 5 shows in about a week.
Yes.
You must be exhausted.
I am. My time is not fully on yet, but it's a beautiful place. The people down here, something I realize with Palestinians and Arabs around the world is that, we might live in certain places and we take on the characteristics of those places. So, New York Palestinians are a little rough around the edges. San Francisco Palestinians are hippies. Australian Palestinians say a curse word every other word. But ultimately, we are still all Palestinian Arabs with the beauty and generosity and affection of our culture, and that is something that we connect with no matter what. So to experience that, I always tell people. By the way, my American friends, even my American Arab friends, all they're asking me, and just to let you know how dumb we are. I mean, what do you think is the one question I got from all my Arab American friends during this last week?
Did you see a kangaroo?
Did you see a kangaroo? That's right. Did you see a kangaroo? Can you take a selfie with a koala? These are the things that I've been hearing. Okay, just to let you know how globally aware we are. I'm very lucky in my job, and come to my next show so you can hear how I know Janet Jackson. But I'm very lucky in my job that I say this in the show. I said 99% of the world doesn't know who I am, but 1% does. And this 1% loves me very much. They're very dedicated to me because I talk about Palestine and I talk about the truth and I'll never stop. But the weird thing about this 1% is that this 1% doesn't live in 1% of the world. They live in 100% of the world, because being Palestinian means you live everywhere. You can live anywhere except Palestine. We live in every corner of the world. We have slept with every citizenship in the world. And so we are multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-everything. And for people who only have one Palestinian parent, like, your kids, you said your wife is Lebanese, you're Palestinian. I tell people, I say there's no such thing as half Palestinian. If you're a little Palestinian, you're as Palestinian as the rest of us. And that beauty of that struggle and culture and truth being passed down, it lives in every corner of the world. So only 1% of the world might know who I am, but I am internationally, globally famous in every part of the world, even if it's only a couple people. So, I take a lot of pride in that.
I think you can extend that to intergalactic.
I would listen. I wouldn't be surprised if Israel kicked some of us to Mars too. Maybe there's some of us there. Who knows? But I mean, I haven't been. The only place I haven't been yet is Antarctica, and there's got to be a Palestinian there. There's got to.
They're all PhDs. They're all PhDs. So
they're PhDs, and I don't know. Antarctica must need like a jewelry store or a gas station. I mean, we must be there. I mean, we're everywhere. For instance, the Debwanis, your people, they have made a base in some remote nowhere town in New Mexico called Gallup, New Mexico, where one Debwani went like 40 years ago. Yeah. He made friends with the natives because there's lots of reservations out there. He saw that they made beautiful jewelry and they weren't really selling it to white people. So he started buying it from the natives and then selling it to white people at a big profit. And he became that guy. And then he told another guy and he said, come here. And there's like nobody in Gallup. I mean, really, it's a small town. It has like 5,000 people, but it has like a Dear Debwani Association of Gallup, New Mexico, and a mosque. And they have weddings, and like singers have to fly from Chicago to Albuquerque and then drive 2 hours to Gallup to walk into a room of 300 Debwanis for a wedding. I mean, this is what we do. And so it is a very, very beautiful thing. Being Palestinian has meant that we've had to deal with all this struggle and all this dispossession and hurt and suffering for 75 years. But it means everyone in the world probably knows a Palestinian because of our struggle. And everyone has heard the story, and it's finally taking root. Things are changing. And as far as I'm concerned, Netanyahu can stay prime minister because he's going to liberate Palestine by accident. And we'll name a street after him, and all that kind of stuff. But it's being us is a very crazy alternate universe type thing, but I happen to believe it's one of the most beautiful things in the world. I mean, otherwise, why else would I ever be friends with somebody in Melbourne, Australia? Mm-hmm. Only you, because you're Palestinian. We share this thing immediately with each other, and that kind of beauty can never be matched by anything else.
It was the worst thing and the best thing that ever happened to us, Zionism.
That's right.
Amer, we've only got a few minutes left. Why don't you tell us when you're coming back and when what we might expect the next time you're here?
Well, I'll put together a new show. Comedians, I don't know if I told you this before, Nasser, but I wish I was a singer, man. A singer sings one song, 2 songs maybe, and they can sing that. It becomes popular, and they can sing it for 30 years. Okay, and they can go to the same place over and over again and sing it for people. Just say sing. And by the way, when you go to like concert and the singer's like, I'm going to sing one of my new songs, everybody boos. No, sing the old song. Okay. I wish I was a singer. Instead, I'm a comedian where if somebody comes to my show and then they come to another show like a year later, they're like, oh, I heard that joke before. I don't like. So I have to come up with new stuff. So I need a little time, first of all. Okay. But I would love to start coming to Australia once a year, maybe once every 2 years, and doing shows and connecting with people over and over again because, it's a beautiful place physically. The people have kept our strong Palestinian Arab culture. So hopefully I'll be here next year. I want to do a few more cities. I would love to go to Perth. I would love to go to Brisbane, Canberra, visit a few more communities, and really tell our story more and more as Palestinians and Arabs. And so I'll tell you, my price will be a lot higher. I mean, it's a long flight. I mean, man, woo! I don't know if I can do it again. I did it once. I'm like a drug dealer, man. I came here. I did it once for a good price. But now we're going market rates. No more Arab negotiating. No, but I mean it has been a wonderful, wonderful thing, and I can't wait to come back. Frankly,
brilliant, Amer. Well, you do something for us so well with culture, with art, with comedy. It's humanize us, and with all the demonization of everything that comes with being a Palestinian. Your shows, and I know in our show in Melbourne, we had quite a few white people, including Robert in the front row, who felt like he was part of the show. You cast us in a different light and really show Palestine for the beauty that it is. So thanks so very much for all that you do, Amer.
Well, thank you for being an amazing part of our community. And I want you to know that I love you and I'm proud of you.
Thanks, Amer. I love you and I'm proud of you too. That was Amer Zahr, our Palestinian-American comedian, activist, lawyer, educator, superstar. joining us. When he comes next time, make sure you catch him. Thanks for listening. Share the podcast. And remember, there's never been a better time for a free Palestine.